October 18th, 1959. The Plaza Hotel, Manhattan. Frank Costello sat in a private suite on the 12th floor, surrounded by the most powerful men in organized crime. Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Meyer Lansky, Tommy Lucchese. They'd pooled their money, $1 million cash, all of it for one purpose: to make Bumpy Johnson disappear from Harlem. Not kill him, buy him out, give him enough money to retire anywhere in the world, live like a king, just leave Harlem. Frank Costello made the call himself. "Bumpy, we need to talk. The Plaza, 8 p.m. Come alone." Bumpy arrived at 7:58 p.m., wearing a navy blue suit and carrying nothing but a cigarette case.
He walked into that room, looked at $1 million stacked on the table, looked at 5 mob bosses waiting for his answer, and said 4 words that would echo through the streets of Harlem for the next 50 years. 4 words that changed everything.
To understand what happened in that hotel room, you need to understand what Harlem meant in 1959. It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a kingdom. And Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster, he was a protector. By 1959, Bumpy had been running Harlem for 25 years. He controlled the numbers racket, he settled disputes between rival crews, he kept the police in check. He made sure black businesses could operate without being extorted by white mobsters. And most importantly, he kept heroin out. The Italian families hated that because heroin was the future of organized crime. Prohibition was over. Gambling was being legalized state by state. But drugs? Drugs were forever. And Harlem, with its dense population and economic desperation, was the perfect market.
Except Bumpy Johnson stood in the way. In 1957, Vito Genovese tried to move heroin into Harlem through his soldiers. Bumpy's people intercepted the shipment, burned the product, and sent Genovese's men back to the Bronx with a message: "Not here." Genovese wanted war. Frank Costello talked him down. "You can't win a war in Harlem. The people love Bumpy. You kill him, you turn 200,000 black people against us. Find another way." In 1958, Carlo Gambino tried a different approach. He offered to partner with Bumpy, split the heroin profits 50-50. Bumpy refused without even hearing the full pitch. Gambino left angry, but smart enough not to push it. By late 1959, the 5 families were losing patience.
Harlem represented millions in untapped revenue, and one man, one black man, was keeping them out.
So they made a decision. Stop trying to fight him. Stop trying to partner with him. Just buy him out. October 15th, 1959. Frank Costello called a meeting of the commission. All 5 families sent representatives. The topic: the Harlem problem. "Gentlemen," Costello began, "we've tried threats, we've tried negotiations. Bumpy Johnson isn't interested. So I propose something different. We pay him to leave." Vito Genovese scoffed. "Pay him? We should put a bullet in his head." "You want to try that?" Costello asked calmly. "Because Dutch Schultz tried it in 1935. Bumpy's still here. Dutch is dead." The room went quiet. "How much are we talking about?" Carlo Gambino asked. "Enough that he can't refuse. $1 million. Everyone stared.
In 1959, $1 million wasn't just wealth. It was generational fortune. You could buy a mansion in any city in America, retire to Europe, live like royalty for the rest of your life. "He'd be stupid not to take it," Tommy Lucchese said. "Maybe," Costello replied. "But Bumpy Johnson isn't motivated by money. He's motivated by loyalty to Harlem." "Then we make him understand," Genovese said, leaning forward. "Take the money, or we flood Harlem with heroin anyway. And when the neighborhood falls apart, it's on him." Meyer Lansky, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "That might work. Give him a choice. Take the money and leave Harlem in peace, or refuse and watch us destroy what he's spent 25 years building." The vote was unanimous.
Offer Bumpy Johnson $1 million to leave Harlem. If he refuses, move forward with the heroin operation anyway.
October 18th, 1959, 11 a.m. Bumpy Johnson was eating lunch at Wells Restaurant when the call came. His lieutenant, Willie Thompson, handed him the phone. "Boss, it's Frank Costello." Bumpy set down his fork. Frank Costello didn't call unless something significant was happening. "Frank." "Bumpy, we need to talk, face to face." "About what?" "About your future and Harlem's future." Bumpy lit a cigarette. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. The Plaza Hotel, Suite 1217, 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone." "Who else will be there?" Costello paused. "Everyone who matters." Bumpy understood immediately. This wasn't a social call. This was the commission. "I'll be there." He hung up.
Willie leaned in. "Boss, that sounds like a setup." "It's not," Bumpy said. "If they wanted me dead, they wouldn't invite me to the plaza. They'd just do it."
"Then what do they want?" "We'll find out at 8 p.m. The rest of the day, Bumpy went about his business as usual, collected money from his policy banks, settled a dispute between two numbers runners, had dinner with his wife, Mamie, at their apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. "You're quiet tonight," Mamie said. "Long day." "Ellsworth, I've been married to you for 10 years. I know when something's wrong." Bumpy smiled. "Nothing's wrong."
"Just a meeting tonight." "With who?" "Some old friends." Mamie set down her fork. "The kind of old friends who carry guns?" "The kind who carry briefcases." "That's worse." Bumpy laughed. "You're probably right." At 7:30 p.m. he kissed Mamie goodbye, walked down to his Lincoln Continental, and drove to Manhattan.
7:58 p.m. The Plaza Hotel lobby was crowded with tourists, businessmen, couples dressed for dinner. Bumpy walked through like he belonged there, took the elevator to the 12th floor, and found Suite 1217. He knocked twice. The door opened. A bodyguard Bumpy didn't recognize, probably Genovese's, stepped aside. Bumpy walked in. The suite was massive: living room, bedroom, full bar. And sitting around a mahogany table were 5 men: Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Meyer Lansky, Tommy Lucchese, the heads of New York's 5 families, or their representatives. This was as official as organized crime got.
On the table between them sat a leather briefcase. Bumpy, Costello stood, extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." Bumpy shook it, nodded to the others. "Gentlemen, please sit." Costello gestured to an empty chair.
Bumpy sat. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Costello opened the briefcase. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. Neat, clean, more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. $1 million, Costello said simply. Bumpy looked at the money, then at Costello. "What's the catch?" "No catch. It's yours. All of it." "For what?" Genovese leaned forward. "For leaving Harlem." The room went silent. Bumpy's expression didn't change. He just sat there, looking at the money. "You want me to leave Harlem?" Bumpy said slowly. "Yes," Costello replied. "Take the money. Go anywhere you want. Florida, California, Europe. We don't care. Just leave Harlem and never come back." "And if I refuse?" Genovese smiled. "Not a friendly smile. Then we move forward without you." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Carlo Gambino said. "We're moving heroin into Harlem whether you like it or not. We've been patient, Bumpy. We've respected your territory. But Harlem represents too much money to ignore." Meyer Lansky added, "This is a courtesy, Bumpy. We're offering you a way out with your dignity and your wealth intact. Take it." Bumpy pulled out his cigarette case, lit one, took a long drag. The 5 mob bosses watched him, waiting. "Let me make sure I understand," Bumpy said. "You're offering me $1 million to abandon the neighborhood I've protected for 25 years. And if I refuse, you're going to flood Harlem with heroin." "That's correct," Costello said. Bumpy nodded slowly. "And you think that's a choice?" "It's a generous choice," Genovese snapped. "Most men in your position don't get a choice at all." Bumpy looked at each of them. Frank Costello, the politician. Vito Genovese, the brute. Carlo Gambino, the snake.
Meyer Lansky, the accountant, Tommy Lucchese, the diplomat, 5 of the most powerful criminals in America. And they were asking him, a black man from North Carolina who'd built an empire with nothing but intelligence and will, to walk away. "You know what the problem is with you gentlemen?" Bumpy said quietly. "What's that?" Costello asked. "You think everything has a price." He stood up, buttoned his jacket. "That money," Bumpy gestured to the briefcase, "is impressive. $1 million. Most men would kill for that."
Hell, most men would sell their mothers for that. He took another drag of his cigarette. But I'm not most men.
Bumpy, Costello started, but Bumpy held up a hand. "Let me finish. You came here tonight thinking you could buy me, pay me off, make me disappear. Because in your world, that's how things work. Money solves problems. But you made a fundamental miscalculation." "Which is?" Genovese asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "You thought I was doing this for profit." Bumpy walked to the window, looked out at Manhattan. The lights, the cars, the people. "I didn't build Harlem to get rich. I built it to protect my people. Every policy bank I run, that's jobs for black men who can't get work anywhere else. Every cop I pay off, that's one less badge harassing kids on street corners. Every time I stop someone like you from moving poison into my neighborhood, that's another generation of children who grow up without seeing their parents turned into addicts." He turned back to face them. "So no, Frank, you can't buy me, because what I have in Harlem isn't for sale." The room was dead silent. Genovese's face was red. Gambino's jaw was tight. But Costello just nodded slowly. "We expected you might say that." "Then why waste my time with this?" "Because we had to try, out of respect." Costello closed the briefcase. "But now we need your answer, and not just for tonight, forever." "My answer?" Bumpy smiled, cold, dangerous, the smile that made men check over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. "Harlem's not for sale." 4 words, simple, direct, absolute. Genovese stood up. "Then you're making a mistake." "No," Bumpy said quietly. "You are." Is that a threat? It's a fact. You think you can move heroin into Harlem without me knowing, without my people stopping you? You think you can operate in my neighborhood without consequences? Tommy Lucchese spoke for the first time. "Bumpy, we're not trying to disrespect you, but this is business, and business is bigger than any one man." "You're right," Bumpy said. "Business is bigger than any one man, but Harlem is bigger than business." He walked toward the door, then paused. "You gentlemen have a decision to make. You can respect my territory, and we continue to coexist peacefully. Or you can try to move product into Harlem, and you'll learn what it costs to fight a man who isn't afraid to die." Meyer Lansky stood. "Bumpy, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm giving you a choice, the same choice you gave me." Bumpy opened the door, looked back one last time. "Keep your $1 million, gentlemen. Buy yourself something nice, but don't ever insult me by trying to buy my loyalty again." He walked out. The door closed behind him. The 5 mob bosses sat in silence. Finally, Genovese exploded. "That arrogant—" "Shut up, Vito," Costello said quietly. "What?" "He just told us he's willing to die for Harlem. You want to fight a man like that? We have armies, we have money, we have—" "And he has an entire neighborhood behind him," Meyer Lansky interrupted. "Every person in Harlem, every street soldier, every policy runner, every mother, every teacher, every kid on every corner, they're loyal to him. Not because he pays them.
Because he protects them.
Carlo Gambino leaned back. "So what do we do?" Costello looked at the briefcase full of money. "We respect his decision." "You're joking," Genevieve said. "I'm serious. We offered him the money. He refused. That's his choice. And if we move heroin into Harlem now, we're the ones breaking the truce, which means every other black operator in every other city will look at what we did to Bumpy and decide we can't be trusted. So we just let him win? He already won, Vito. The moment we made this offer, we admitted we can't take Harlem by force. So yes, he won." Tommy Lucchese closed the briefcase.
What about the heroin operation? Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island, plenty of markets. Costello stood. But Harlem?
Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson.
October 19th, 1959, 1:47 a.m. Bumpy Johnson walked into Wells' restaurant. The place was nearly empty, just a few stragglers finishing late dinners. Willie Thompson was waiting in their usual booth. "How'd it go, boss?" Willie asked. Bumpy sat down, signaled the waiter coffee. "They offered me $1 million. Willie's eyes went wide. "$1 million? For what?" "To leave Harlem." "And?" "I told them Harlem's not for sale." Willie let out a breath. "Boss, that's a lot of money to walk away from." "It's not about the money, Willie. It never was." The coffee arrived.
Bumpy took a sip. Black, no sugar, the way he always drank it. "They're going to come anyway," Willie said quietly. "They're going to try to move heroin in." "I know. So what's the plan?"
Bumpy smiled. "We make it so expensive that they give up." "How?" "By being smarter than them, faster than them, more connected than them." He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the same notebook he'd been keeping for 20 years. Names, addresses, secrets, debts owed, favors collected. They think this is about territory, about who controls what streets, but that's not what this is about. Then what is it? It's about family. They're fighting for profit. I'm fighting for survival. And a man fighting for survival will always beat a man fighting for money. Willie nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Reach out to every policy banker in Harlem, every numbers runner, every street captain. I want a meeting tomorrow night."
Wells Restaurant, 9 p.m. All of them? Everyone who operates in Harlem. This affects all of us.
October 19th, 1959, 9 p.m. Wells' restaurant was packed. 40 men crowded into the back room. Policy bankers, numbers runners, street captains, independent operators. Every person who made their living in Harlem's underground economy. They all knew why they were there. Bumpy Johnson stood at the front of the room. No microphone, no stage, just a man talking to his people. "Last night," Bumpy began, "the 5 families offered me $1 million to leave Harlem." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "They want to move heroin into this neighborhood. They think Harlem is just another market, just another place to make money. And they thought they could buy me out." He paused, looked at every face in the room. "I told them no." The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Someone shouted, "That's my boss."
Bumpy raised his hand, and the room went quiet. "But here's what you need to understand. They're coming anyway. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually they're going to try to move product into Harlem. And when they do, we need to be ready." "How do we fight the 5 families?" someone asked. "We don't fight them with guns. We fight them with information, with community, with the one thing they can't buy." "What's that?" "Loyalty." Bumpy walked to the center of the room. "Here's what's going to happen. Every shipment of heroin that comes into Harlem, we're going to know about it. Every dealer they try to recruit, we're going to reach first.
Every corner they try to claim, we're going to make sure our people are already there. And if they send soldiers, then we defend ourselves, but we do it smart. No wars in the streets, no shootouts that bring the police. We make it so difficult, so expensive, so dangerous for them to operate here that they give up." Marcus Reed, a policy banker from 145th Street, stood up. "Bumpy, with all respect, they have more money than us, more guns, more soldiers." "You're right," Bumpy said. "They do, but we have something they don't." "What?" "We live here. This is our home. Every block, every building, every person. We know who belongs and who doesn't. We know when something's wrong, and that knowledge is more powerful than all their money." He pulled out his notebook. "I've been keeping track of every shipment that comes through New York, the ports they use, the trucks they drive, the warehouses they store product in. I know their supply chains better than they do.
He tossed the notebook on the table. Every one of you is going to get a copy of this information, and every one of you is going to use it to protect your territory. Samuel Washington, a numbers runner from 125th Street, raised his hand. What if they come after our families? Then we protect them, together. That's what community means. Bumpy's voice got quieter, more intense. These men think we're just criminals, just gangsters trying to make money. But they're wrong. We're protectors. Every dollar we make goes back into this neighborhood. Schools, churches, businesses. We take care of our own. But the 5 families are outsiders. They don't care about Harlem. They don't care if kids become addicts. They don't care if families fall apart. All they care about is profit, and we're not going to let them poison our neighborhood. The room was silent. Then Marcus Reed started clapping.
Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Bumpy raised his hand again. One more thing. If any of you want out, now's the time. Take your money, leave Harlem, start over somewhere else. I won't judge you. This is going to be dangerous, and I can't promise all of us will survive it. Nobody moved. Anyone? Bumpy asked. Anyone want to leave? Silence. Then Willie Thompson stood. Boss, we're with you, all of us. To the end, Samuel Washington added. Marcus Reed nodded. Harlan's not for sale. You said it last night. We're saying it now. Bumpy felt something he rarely felt. Pride. Then we're in this together. Go home, protect your families, watch your territories, and if you see anything suspicious, you let me know immediately. The meeting ended at 10:30 p.m. As people filed out, Willie stayed behind. You really think we can stop them? I don't know, Bumpy admitted. But I know this. I'd rather die fighting for Harlem than live rich somewhere else. November 1959. The first shipment came. 200 kilos of pure heroin. Smuggled through the Brooklyn docks. Stored in a warehouse in the Bronx. Destined for Harlem. Bumpy knew about it 4 days before it arrived. His contact at the docks, a longshoreman named Terry, called with the details. Ship name, arrival time, warehouse address. Bumpy didn't intercept it. He did something smarter. He called Detective Raymond Phillips, an NYPD narcotics officer who'd been investigating the 5 families for years. Ray, I have information about a major heroin shipment. Where? Brooklyn Docks, Pier 42, arriving Thursday at 3 a.m. How do you know this? Does it matter? I suppose not. What do you want in return? Nothing. Just make sure it doesn't end up in Harlem. Thursday at 3 a.m., the NYPD raided the warehouse. Arrested 6 men. Seized 200 kilos of heroin, worth millions on the street. The 5 families were furious. They thought they had a leak in their organization. They started interrogating their own people, suspected betrayals where none existed, created paranoia. Bumpy watched it all unfold and smiled. December 1959. Vito Genovese tried a different approach. He sent recruiters into Harlem. Young, smooth-talking guys who offered local dealers better prices, better product, better protection. Most dealers refused immediately. They were loyal to Bumpy. But 3 dealers took the offer. They started selling Genovese's heroin on 140th Street. Within 48 hours, Bumpy knew about it. He didn't send soldiers. He sent community leaders, pastors, teachers, mothers. They went door to door, explained what heroin was doing to other neighborhoods, showed pictures of addicts, of families destroyed, of children growing up without parents. Within a week, nobody was buying from those 3 dealers. The dealers, desperate, tried to sell to customers outside Harlem, but Bumpy's network extended beyond his neighborhood. He warned other operators. Within 2 weeks, the 3 dealers were broke. They went back to Genovese's people, asked for more product on credit. Genovese refused, told them they were on their own. 2 of them left New York entirely. The 3rd came to Bumpy, begging for forgiveness. Bumpy looked at him. You chose money over loyalty. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. Can I come back? Bumpy thought about it. You can stay in Harlem, but you don't work for me.
You're on your own. And if you ever sell heroin in this neighborhood again, you won't get a second chance." The dealer nodded, grateful to still be alive.
January 1960. Carlo Gambino tried brute force. He sent 10 soldiers into Harlem, heavily armed. Their orders were simple: establish territory on 135th Street, set up shop, sell product, shoot anyone who interfered. They arrived on a Tuesday night, rented an apartment, started scouting locations. By Wednesday morning, Bumpy knew everything: who they were, where they were staying, what they were planning. He didn't attack them, he isolated them. Every store they tried to buy from was suddenly out of stock. Every restaurant they tried to eat at was suddenly closed for repairs. Every person they tried to talk to suddenly didn't speak English. The soldiers lasted 4 days. No violence, no confrontation.
Just a complete and total refusal to acknowledge their existence. They reported back to Gambino, "We can't operate there. The entire neighborhood is against us."
February 1960. Meyer Lansky, the smartest of the 5 bosses, tried the most sophisticated approach. He didn't send drugs. He didn't send soldiers. He sent money. He started buying legitimate businesses in Harlem: laundromats, grocery stores, barbershops. His plan was simple: control the economy, control the neighborhood. Bumpy countered with community organizing. He helped local business owners form a coalition. They pooled resources, negotiated with banks for better loans, supported each other against outside competition. When Lansky's front companies tried to buy businesses, the owners refused, not because they were threatened, because they had better options. By March, Lansky had spent $500,000 and controlled exactly 0 businesses in Harlem.
April 1960. 6 months after Bumpy refused the $1 million offer, Frank Costello called another commission meeting. "Gentlemen," Costello began, "we need to discuss Harlem." "What's to discuss?" Genovese snapped. "We've lost 3 shipments, 10 soldiers, and over $1 million trying to move into that neighborhood." "Exactly," Costello said. "We're losing money, time, resources, and for what? One neighborhood in one city." "But the principle," Carlo Gambino started. "The principle is that we're businessmen, and this isn't good business." Meyer Lansky nodded. "Frank's right. We've tried everything: force, bribery, economics. Nothing works. Bumpy Johnson has the community behind him."
And you can't fight an entire community. Tommy Lucchese leaned forward. "So we just give up?" "We accept reality," Costello said. "Harlem is off limits. We operate everywhere else in New York: Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Manhattan below 110th Street. But Harlem, we leave it alone."
Vito Genovese stood up. "I'm not accepting this." "Then you do it alone," Costello said firmly. "The rest of us are moving on." The vote was 4-1. Harlem remained independent territory. May 1960. 7 months after the Plaza Hotel meeting, Bumpy received a phone call. Frank Costello. "Bumpy, I wanted to call personally. We're pulling out of Harlem. No more attempts, no more shipments. You were right. We can't win this fight. I appreciate the honesty, Frank. You earned it. What you did these past 6 months, that was impressive. I just protected my home. It was more than that. You taught us something." "What's that?" "That some things can't be bought."
No matter the price. Costello paused. "That $1 million, the offer still stands if you ever change your mind." Bumpy smiled. "I won't. But thanks for respecting my decision. You didn't give us much choice."
June 1960. Bumpy called another meeting at Wells Restaurant. The same 40 men who'd been there 7 months earlier. "It's over," Bumpy announced. "The 5 families are pulling out of Harlem." The room erupted in cheers. "We did it," someone shouted. "No," Bumpy said firmly. "We didn't do anything yet. We won a battle, but the war never ends. There will always be someone trying to move heroin into this neighborhood, someone trying to exploit our people, someone thinking they can buy us out." He looked at every face. "So we stay vigilant, we stay united, and we never ever sell out." No matter how much money they offer, Marcus Reed stood. Harlem's not for sale. The entire room repeated it. Harlem's not for sale. Those 4 words became legend, painted on walls, whispered on street corners, taught to children.
Years later, in 1968, when Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack at Wells Restaurant, thousands attended his funeral. Politicians, musicians, community leaders, and 40 men who'd stood with him in that back room in 1959. At the funeral, someone asked Willie Thompson what Bumpy's greatest achievement was. Willie thought for a moment. He was offered $1 million to walk away from everything he'd built, and he said no, because some things are worth more than money. What things? Loyalty, community, home. That's what Bumpy Johnson understood that the 5 families never could. Power isn't about how much money you have. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect what matters.
October 18, 1959, the night Bumpy Johnson walked out of the Plaza Hotel, leaving $1 million on the table, saying 4 simple words: Harlem's not for sale. Those words echoed through history. They became the standard, the line that couldn't be crossed. And for the next 9 years, until Bumpy died, not a single Italian mobster tried to move heroin into Harlem. Not because they couldn't, because they learned that some men can't be bought, some neighborhoods can't be conquered, and some legends can't be stopped. If this story of loyalty over money, of principle over profit, moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that real wealth isn't in your bank account, it's in what you stand for.
Share this with someone who needs to hear that some things will never be for sale. What would you have done with that $1 million? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the richest man in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who knows what he won't sell.